I took my son's old laptop to a repair shop. Less than an hour later, the technician pulled me aside, told me to cancel everything, and leave before my son realized what I'd seen. The technician grabbed my arm and pulled me behind the counter before I could even say hello. "You need to see this," he whispered. "Right now." His face was the color of old chalk. "I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am a 58-year-old woman who irons her own tablecloths, keeps a handwritten grocery list on the refrigerator door, and has never once in her life been the kind of person anything dramatic happens to. I have a Tuesday book club. I bake lemon pound cake for the neighbors when they're sick. I drive a 2019 Honda CR-V that still smells faintly of the Christmas tree air freshener Robert bought me 2 years ago. I am not a woman who expects her world to end on a Wednesday morning over a cracked laptop screen. But Jason, that was the technician's name, Jason Merritt, 26 years old, 3 years working at TechFix on Maple Avenue. Jason was staring at me like I was already standing at the edge of something I couldn't come back from. He turned the screen toward me without a word, and everything I thought I knew about my life cracked clean down the middle. I need to back up. Not far, just far enough. David is our son. Was our son. Is our son. I still don't know which tense to use, and it's been almost 2 years. Some mornings I wake up and he is still the baby I brought home in a yellow blanket in October 1991. And some mornings he is the man in handcuffs being walked through a precinct hallway, and I have not yet figured out how to make those two versions of the same person coexist inside my chest. He's 32. Brown hair like Robert's. My eyes. He was a good student. Not exceptional, just solid. The kind of kid who remembered to call on birthdays and always brought a bottle of wine when he came to dinner. He worked in finance, mid-level position at a portfolio management firm, made decent money. He had a nice apartment 20 minutes from our house in Claremont. He also had Victoria. We met her maybe 8 months before everything fell apart. Pretty woman, dark hair, sharp in a way that made you feel slightly evaluated whenever she looked at you. She smiled often and said very little, which I had initially mistaken for shyness. Robert liked her well enough. I told myself I was being a protective mother, that the slight unease I felt around her was just the old instinct kicking in, the one that whispers no one is good enough for your child. I told myself a lot of things that year. David had started coming around more in the spring, unexpectedly, usually. He'd show up on a Saturday morning with coffees. Robert takes his with cream and 1 sugar, and David had known that since high school, and he'd sit with us at the kitchen table and talk about nothing much. Work, the news, whatever. He started offering to make dinner sometimes when he visited on Sundays. He'd stand in our kitchen and stir pasta sauce while Robert watched baseball in the other room and I set the table, and it had felt like a gift. It had felt like my son choosing to come home. I thought we were entering a new chapter, the chapter where your kids are finally adults and you all become something more like friends. Instead, my son was measuring out poison into his father's coffee. I know that now. I did not know it on the Wednesday morning I loaded his cracked laptop into a canvas tote bag and drove it to TechFix. He'd asked me to take it in for him. Said he was too busy that week. Screen had shattered from a drop. Could I drop it off? I had his charger. His password written on a post-it. Standard. Unremarkable. I was in and out the door in under 4 minutes. Jason called me less than an hour later. He said very quietly, "Mrs. Barbara, could you come back in? There's something here you need to see before we proceed. It's important." I assumed it was a billing issue. Maybe the repair was more expensive than quoted. Maybe the laptop was too old to fix. I remember being mildly annoyed as I got back in the car. I remember the specific smell of that September air, warm and still with just the first edge of autumn in it, as I pushed open the glass door to TechFix for the second time that morning. I will never forget it. The way normal feels right before it stops. Jason was waiting at the counter. He waved me around the side immediately, glancing at the door, and led me to the workstation at the back of the shop where the laptop was open. There was a folder open on screen, a spreadsheet. My name, Barbara Connolly. Robert's name, our home address, our life insurance policy numbers. I recognized them because I am the one who manages our paperwork, and the sight of those numbers in a spreadsheet column on my son's laptop made my brain do something strange. It just stopped processing for a moment, like a car engine turning over and failing to catch. Below that, the estimated value of our house, accurate to within about $5,000. Below that, a timeline, a countdown. I read it the way you read something that doesn't make sense, going back over the same lines because surely you've misread, surely your eyes are playing tricks, but the words stayed the same every time. September 3rd, first dose administered in Dad's breakfast. He didn't notice. The room moved. The floor didn't change, but something shifted anyway, some fundamental angle of reality tipping just slightly off axis, and I reached out and put my hand on the counter to steady myself. Victoria said symptoms only appear after a few weeks. Tiredness, dizziness, forgetting things. Looks natural. Robert had been dizzy. He had mentioned it twice in the past month, once when he stood up too fast from the couch and had to grip the door frame, once last week when he stumbled on the back porch steps, and I'd made him sit down and brought him a glass of water. I had made an appointment with Dr. Pearson for the following Tuesday. I had told Robert it was probably his blood pressure. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the laptop to keep scrolling. Mom only later. She's too observant. I'll wait until we're closer to the goal. I have thought about those words every single day since. She's too observant. As if that were a problem to be managed. As if my attention to detail in my own home were a variable my son had to account for in a plan to kill us both. There's more, Jason said. His voice was almost a whisper, like he was afraid of being overheard in a shop that was currently empty. A lot more. He opened another folder. Screenshots. Text messages between a number saved as David and one saved as V babe. My parents lasted 6 months. No one suspected a thing. Doctor blamed age. I read that sentence 3 times. My parents lasted 6 months. Victoria had done this before. Victoria had watched 2 people die, her own parents, and no one had noticed. And she had called that a success. And she had brought that knowledge to my son, like a gift, like a template, like a business plan. I ran to the bathroom at the back of the shop and threw up into the sink. I turned the tap on full and stood there with my face under the cold water, and I talked to myself in the mirror. I said, "You are Barbara Connolly. You are 58 years old. Robert is still alive. You have time. You have time." I said it until my breathing slowed. When I came back out, pale and wrung out and functioning purely on a kind of cold automatic override I didn't know I possessed, Jason was standing with a glass of water and the expression of a young man who had seen something that would change him permanently and was doing his best to hold it together for the sake of the woman in front of him. He handed me the water without speaking. I drank it. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to me, flat, like someone had pressed the air out of it. "The notes go back 6 months, he said. He's been planning this since at least March, 6 months ago, when David had started dropping by on weekends with coffees, when he'd started offering to make dinner, when I had stood in my own kitchen feeling grateful for the return of my son, and not once thought to ask myself why. Every Sunday dinner, every Saturday coffee, every casual I'll make dad's. I know how he takes it. Oh God, oh God. I need everything copied," I said. I don't know where those words came from. Some survival mechanism that kicked in underneath the grief because the grief was too large to feel all at once and I needed something smaller and actionable to hold on to. "Every file, everything you can find." "Already done," Jason said. He held up a USB drive. Black, small, unremarkable. The kind of thing you can buy in a pack of 5 at the drugstore. I took it from him and held it in both hands. "Mrs. Barbara." He looked at me directly. This 26-year-old kid with grease on his sleeve and absolute steadiness in his eyes. "Go to the police. Tonight. Do not go home first. Do not call David. Do not let him know you've been here." I nodded. "And one more thing." He paused. "The laptop needs to look like we haven't touched it, like you picked it up and paid normally and left. If he checks the files, the folder timestamps, I understand. I paid the diagnostic fee." Jason wrote up a repair estimate on a real receipt and handed it to me. We shook hands across the counter like 2 people conducting ordinary business, and I walked out into the September morning with a USB drive in my coat pocket and a sound in my ears like radio static that would not stop for 3 days. I drove to Robert. He was at his desk in the home office when I walked in, reading glasses on, the same man I had been married to for 34 years, drinking a cup of coffee he had made himself because David wasn't there that morning, and so I had not yet found a way to be grateful that he wasn't. I closed the door behind me. I said, "I need you to put the coffee down and come sit with me. Something has happened and I need to show you something, and I need you to stay calm because I cannot do this if you don't stay calm." He looked at me over his reading glasses. Robert Connolly can read a room in about 4 seconds. 22 years as a civil engineer. The man does not miss details. He put the coffee down. I watched my husband's face as he read the spreadsheet. I watched it move through 10 years in 60 seconds. The particular geography of a man's face traveling through confusion and skepticism and dawning comprehension and something I can only call a horror so complete it had no sound. He didn't gasp. He didn't shout. He just went very, very still, the way people go still when something is too large to react to in normal human scale. "The dizziness," he said finally. His voice was barely there, just breath with shape to it. "Last week when I fell on the porch, I know. He was here that morning. He made my coffee. He looked up at me. He insisted on it. I remember because I said I'd get it myself, and he said to sit down. He'd do it. I know, Robert." We sat there for a moment that was not really a moment. It was longer than that. It was something that existed outside of regular time, a pause in which we both held the full weight of what had been done to us, and what might have been, and what our son had become, and what the next hours of our lives were going to require of us. Then Robert's jaw set. In 34 years, I have seen that jaw set exactly 3 times. Once when my mother was sick, once when we lost the house in the recession, and now, police station, he said. Right now. We were standing. We had our keys. We were literally halfway across the living room toward the front door when a key turned in the lock, the front lock. David walked in. Blue button-down shirt, relaxed posture, completely ordinary. He smiled when he saw us, that easy smile I had loved his entire life, and said, "Hey, came to grab my laptop if it's ready. Did Jason do a good job?" Robert's hand found mine behind my back. We held on. "I want you to understand what I did next, because I want you to understand what a person is capable of when survival requires it." I looked at my son who had sat across breakfast tables from me for 32 years, who I had taught to ride a bike and helped with algebra homework and held in the hospital when he had his tonsils out at age 7. I looked at him and I smiled and I said, "Perfect job. It's in the bag by the door." My voice did not shake. I did not know I had that in me. I do now. "Awesome. You guys eating dinner? I could order something. Family night." He grinned. I could cook. I felt Robert's grip tighten on my hand. "Not tonight, sweetheart," Robert said. His voice was a masterpiece of ordinary. "Your mother and I have plans." David grabbed the laptop bag. He crossed the room and he kissed me on the forehead, and his lips were warm, and I stood perfectly still and felt it and did not move and thought, I will have the rest of my life to fall apart. Not now, not yet. He left. We stood frozen at the window until his car, a gray Audi A4, disappeared around the corner at the end of the street. We stood there for an extra minute after that, because neither of us trusted that it was real. Then Robert sat down on the couch and put his face in his hands. Not crying, not yet, just folded for a moment, like a building settling after something hits it. I sat beside him. We didn't speak. We just held on to each other in our own living room, in a house our son had been treating as a crime scene for 6 months, until our legs stopped shaking and we could stand again. Then we went to the police. Detective Sandra Okafor had been with the Claremont PD for 19 years, and she had the particular quality of stillness that comes from having heard things that most people never have to hear. She sat across from us in a small conference room at the precinct. Fluorescent light overhead, a box of tissues on the table that I did not touch because if I started crying, I would not stop, and she listened to every word. She did not interrupt. She did not look skeptical. She looked at the USB drive when we handed it across the table, and she looked at us and she said, "Okay, I'm going to need you both to wait here while I get someone from our digital forensics unit." That someone was Marcus Hale, a forensic tech specialist, 7 years with the department, who spent 40 minutes going through the contents of the drive with the patient thoroughness of a man who has learned not to rush the things that matter. He printed files, he cataloged them, he organized them into a manila folder that he labeled in block letters with a marker. Connolly, preliminary, as in just the beginning. Within 2 hours, they had also contacted Detective Ray Castillo from the county's Financial Crimes and Major Offenses Unit, 31 years on the job. He was the one who explained to us, in the careful measured language of a man delivering information that he knows will shatter someone, that what the files described constituted premeditated attempted murder and conspiracy, and that the mention of Victoria, full name Victoria Marsh, they had already run her, had triggered an alert connected to an open investigation in a neighboring county. Her parents, a 2-year-old case that had been ruled natural causes. There was a pause in the room when he said that, a weight that settled. They sent Robert directly to Claremont General that night for a blood panel. I sat in a plastic chair in a beige hospital waiting room at 11:30 p.m., and I thought about all the mornings, the coffees, the Sunday dinners, the way David had always seemed just slightly too eager to get to the kitchen first. The results came back 48 hours later. Arsenic, traces of thallium. One other compound the toxicologists report identified as a heavy metal derivative that I cannot pronounce and will not try to spell here. Dr. Patricia Weiss, who had been toxicology consultant for the county hospital for 12 years, told us that at the rate of accumulation present in Robert's blood work, another 4 to 6 weeks of exposure would have begun producing irreversible liver damage. Another 3 to 4 months after that, it would have looked to any physician without specific reason to test for it, like organ failure consistent with age-related decline. She said the words organ failure consistent with age-related decline, and I watched Robert absorb them, and I held his hand, and I thought about how 6 months ago I had been looking forward to retirement. "You were lucky," Dr. Weiss said carefully. I nodded. I thought, we were Jason Merritt's diagnostic V lucky. We were one cracked laptop screen lucky. I thought about what happens to the people who don't have a Jason. They arrested David on a Thursday. Detective Okafor explained the approach to us beforehand. They would not go to his apartment, too many variables, too much risk of escalation or destruction of evidence. They would call him into the precinct under the pretext of a neighborhood robbery investigation, a canvass of residents in the area. David's apartment building was 2 blocks from an incident 2 weeks prior. Real case, convenient cover. They would get him seated. Then they would present the evidence. She asked if we wanted to be present. She explained we could observe from the adjacent room through the one-way glass. Robert looked at me. I looked at Robert. Yes, I said. We sat in that dark observation room, Robert and I, on 2 plastic chairs side by side, and we watched Detective Castillo and a younger detective named Torres sit down across from our son. David was relaxed when he walked in. He sat the way he always sat, slightly leaned back, easy, the posture of a man who has never once in his life expected to be caught. He made small talk with the officer who brought him coffee. He checked his phone. Then Castillo slid the first printout across the table. I watched David look at it. I watched his face. I am not going to describe it in detail because some things are mine to keep. And that moment, watching something fall apart behind the eyes of a person you made, belongs to no one else. I will only say that it happened quickly, and it happened completely, and it was the worst thing I have ever seen. That's your laptop, Castillo said. That's your password. That's your handwriting in the notes column. David looked at the papers for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. I can explain. Then explain the dosage timeline. Explain the note about your father's breakfast on September 3rd. Explain the text messages with Victoria Marsh discussing the method. Silence. Detective Torres, 29 years old, who had been quiet the entire time, leaned forward slightly. David, did you administer toxic substances to your father, Robert Connolly, without his knowledge or consent? The room held its breath. The longest pause of my life. Longer than labor. Longer than waiting for test results. Longer than the drive to that police station. Yes. Robert's hand found mine in the dark and held on. They cuffed David right there at the table. Standard procedure for the charge. He did not resist. He went very quiet, the way he had gone quiet as a kid when he knew he'd done something wrong. This specific stillness, this withdrawal, and I hated myself for recognizing it, for the way my body still read him the way a mother's body reads her child after 3 decades of practice. When he asked, just before they walked him out, whether his parents were present, he asked quietly, almost carefully, like he wasn't sure he had the right to, and Detective Okafor said yes. I saw something inside him give way. Not guilt, exactly. Something older and more broken than guilt. I did not go to him. I stayed in the dark room with Robert's hand in mine, and I let them lead my son out in handcuffs, and I felt the exact specific weight of every single morning he had stood in that kitchen, measuring out poison with the same hands that had once reached up to hold mine crossing a parking lot. You think grief only comes for the dead. It doesn't. Victoria Marsh was arrested the same afternoon at her apartment. She opened the door in a silk blouse and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about," with such practiced ease that the officers noted it in the arrest report. Her composure was extraordinary. It held through processing, through arraignment, through the early weeks of pretrial. Her mother, a quiet woman named Elaine Marsh, who had been estranged from her daughter for 3 years and had apparently spent those 3 years trying to decide whether suspicion was the same as knowledge, contacted the district attorney's office 6 weeks before trial. She testified for 4 days. Elaine Marsh told the court about finding research on heavy metal toxicity on Victoria's computer 2 months before Victoria's father was hospitalized. About a conversation with Victoria in which she had suggested, calmly, that perhaps their father's estate planning was inadequate. About the life insurance policies taken out in the year before both parents died. About the way Victoria had stood at their father's graveside with dry eyes and no expression, and how at the time Elaine had told herself that people grieve differently. She said, "I told myself she was just private about her feelings. I was wrong. I was a coward. I am sorry." She said this directly to me. We made eye contact across the courtroom and she held mine and I nodded once. Because what else do you do with someone else's terrible honesty? What else do you do? Our attorney, Linda Park, 14 years in criminal law, meticulous and unsparing, had organized the evidence into what she called the most straightforward conspiracy case she had handled in a decade. The USB drive, the forensic analysis of the laptop, the toxicology reports, the text messages between David and Victoria, including a thread in which they had discussed in specific terms the dosage adjustments needed as Robert's body weight meant the initial amounts were taking longer than projected. Taking longer than projected. My husband, in a spreadsheet cell. A variable in someone's plan. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder. Attempted murder in the first degree. Unlawful administration of a toxic substance. Victoria's prior case was reopened simultaneously. The charges from her parents' deaths folded into a separate proceeding that moved quickly given the weight of evidence now on record. Victoria received life without the possibility of parole. David received 25 years. When the gavel came down for the last time, Judge Miriam Reyes, 28 years on the bench, who had watched the entire trial with the specific tired attention of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by what people do to each other, Victoria stood up. Her composure, which had held for months, which I had started to wonder if anything could crack, simply shattered. She stood up screaming, her voice raw and unrecognizable, her face finally her actual face, all the careful practiced smoothness gone and underneath it something jagged and desperate and very small. Her attorney grabbed her arm, the bailiff moved. She kept screaming until they got her out of the courtroom, and long after the door closed behind her you could still hear it in the hallway. It was the most honest thing she had done in years. I sat in that courtroom seat for a long time after people had filed out. Robert was beside me. My sister Patricia was on my other side. Linda Park was collecting papers at the table. The afternoon light was coming through the tall windows in long flat bars, and the room was almost empty and very quiet. Somewhere in that courtroom, a 58-year-old woman who used to iron her son's shirts sat in the quiet and tried to understand what it means when justice is real, and you still don't feel the way you thought you would. You don't feel victorious. You don't feel healed. You feel the specific weight of every ordinary morning you will never get back, and the strange lightness of knowing you are still here to miss them. It has been 18 months. Robert's health is good. Full recovery. He started taking morning walks at 6 a.m. His idea, not mine, not the doctor's, just a decision he made in the weeks after the trial, to put his feet on the ground and breathe the air and move through it deliberately. I watch him from the kitchen window sometimes, coming back down the street, and I feel something that doesn't have a clean name. Not happiness, not exactly. Something more like this, still, here. Jason Merritt, I should tell you about Jason Merritt, was recognized by the department. Detective Okafor nominated him for a civilian commendation, which he received in a small ceremony at the precinct in March. I went. I brought lemon pound cake, which is the only thing I know how to do when I want to say something that doesn't have words. He turned red when I handed it to him. He said, "I just didn't feel right, not saying anything." I said, "No, you didn't." He has since started a forensic cybersecurity certification program. He told me he wants to work with law enforcement eventually. I told him he already has. That moment in that shop, that decision to say something instead of nothing, that is the thing that kept Robert alive. It is the thing that meant I got to watch my husband walk back down the street in the morning light. There is no repair estimate for what David did to us. There is no timeline. What I know is this: I am still here. Robert is still here. And some mornings, when the autumn air comes through the kitchen window just right, I stand at the counter and make coffee, and I do not let anyone else touch it, and I drink it in the quiet, and I think about the weight of an ordinary Wednesday morning, and how you never know until later which ones were the ones that saved your